All right, so I thought I would continue this book series with a book that I read back in the late '90s, and it's actually the Millionaire Next Door. I actually looked it up. This book's 20 years old, actually 21 years old. It was written or first published in 1998, and the Millionaire Next Door was a book that I picked up, frankly, because of the title. Right, 20 years ago, I was in my 20s. The idea of being a millionaire seemed possible, but probably unlikely. Right, it was one of those goals to strive for that I didn't really see. I don't know this for sure, but I feel pretty confident in saying that nobody in my family, my immediate family, certainly the ones I was raised around, were millionaires. Um, let alone the millionaires next door. Right, it wasn't. I wasn't raised in an affluent family or situation, so being someone growing up having a job since 12, the idea of being a millionaire was like, you know, unbelievable. So I remember picking up the book and devouring it. And I've probably read this book 30 times cover to cover. Right. So I think I read it 5 or 6 times just that year because I wanted to make sure I got it. And there's been a couple of takeaways. I'd still recommend it if you haven't read it. There's a couple of things. First and foremost, there's a quote that I still remember very early in the book called "Big Hat, No Cattle." In the Silicon Valley, that's maybe, 7 Series BMW or, SL Mercedes, and, it's on lease and it's all flash and no substance. I think that's really what they mean by big hat, no cattle, right? It's all flash and no substance. So that was a big takeaway. I mean, I just assumed everybody that had the cars in the flash had the bank accounts to go with it. Not the case. The other thing that I sort of took away from it is it really doesn't matter about the profession, right? If you are frugal, you do sacrifice, you have a chance. I remember the stories of the two doctors, right? I think it was Dr. South and Dr. North. And, both made more money than I could imagine, right? I think it's like $500,000. And this was in 98. So who knows what that is today. And one was a millionaire next door, right? Lived below their means, didn't have all that. The other one was living paycheck to paycheck. I could not believe somebody that made $500,000 a year lived paycheck to paycheck. Yes, they had 2 houses and lots of cars and country club memberships. And yes, he was a heart surgeon or brain surgeon or whatever it was. So he was successful on the surface, but he was a month, he was out of work for a month. He's toast, right? That lifestyle would go away. And I remember reading that over and over and just not getting it. I did not understand how somebody could make $500,000 a year, have an MD, be called a doctor, and not get it. It didn't translate. I had to read it over and over and over again. And, now that I'm 20 years older, you see it everywhere, right? There are people with advanced degrees, with high paying jobs, lawyers, doctors, VPs, CEOs, whatever. And, if they raise their standard of living to match their income, they're paycheck to paycheck, right? They need that next paycheck, that next stock grant just to survive. And that's a failure. If that's people around you, that's a failure. Don't follow that process, right? That's not healthy. That's why I call it good defense. Sacrifice, delay gratification. It's these things that's hard in the American economy when we're shoved with commercials and social media and all that stuff. So I remember just being in awe of that. And, again, two doctors, similar incomes, just vastly different balance sheets, right? I just couldn't believe it. I remember reading that over and over. Then the other one it talked about that really got me, and this was one I just had to believe because, again, I wasn't in a situation to see it, but it talked about wealthy parents sort of giving money or enabling their kids. And there was, there's the right way to do it, like maybe education, but the wrong way to do it, give them $10,000 a year because that's the charitable contribution. You're just creating, leeches, right? That just, don't know how to work. So it talked a lot about how to raise kids in an environment that really gives them a fighting chance and really allows them to stand on their 2 feet and all of those. And then the book broke down lots of professions and locations and all of that. And really opened my eyes to the fact that, again, it really didn't matter on location or profession. As long as you sort of sacrificed and moved forward, you could get there. So I do recommend it. It's 20 years old. I'm sure it's been updated a couple of times. This is the only copy I have. Written by Thomas Stanley and William Danko. I hope I'm pronouncing those right, both PhDs. And again, I was pretty surprised what I read again 20 years ago. I just read it again about 6 months ago, and it's eye-opening, because even though this book's 20 years old, you can sort of relate it to people in your life. So, this is one of those books I recommend. It's sort of like Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's one of those ones that I read once a year, kind of just to stay level-headed and grounded and make sure I'm making the right calls. It's not really an investing book. It doesn't really give you any how-tos or anything. It's just kind of a raw data book, but it is interesting. I appreciate the second half more now when it talks about where you live and the professions and all of that than maybe I did in my 20s. But again, anybody can do it, which is a great takeaway. And if you haven't read it, I certainly recommend it. Thanks.